Hi everybody, welcome back for another episode of On the Road with the Fish Guy. I am Jay the Fish Guy. You'll notice we're not on the road. It's been 90 plus degrees here in New Hampshire the last couple of days. The fish van does not have air conditioning, so it's just brutal. I have to run with the windows down, mandatory. So this week's episode is not going to be in the fish van. I'm going to use a lot of pictures and visual aids so we can just pretend I won't be on me in my ghetto studio here for too long, I promise. So today's episode, 5 things to consider when you're buying a sump. Everybody loves lists here on YouTube, so I figured I'd jump on the bandwagon and make a list of my own here for this latest episode. So things to consider when you're buying a sump. Number 1. Are you going to buy it or are you going to build it? That's a big question. Buying a sump can be expensive, especially if you're doing a larger one. Acrylic sumps can run hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And the convenience of having it pre-built is definitely nice, especially for folks that might not be DIY friendly. But at the same time, there's plenty of you out there that are, and making your own out of a glass aquarium and just simply buying glass pieces to put baffles in is a very, very cost-effective way to go. Or even if you are even further DIY friendly, you can build your own acrylic sump. So that's number 1. Are you going to build it or are you going to buy it? So number 2 on what to consider is how big of a sump do you need? How big is your tank? How big is your stand? This is something that you get to do once sometimes, because depending on your stand, you may have to put the sump in before the tank goes on the stand. Not all stands are, 2 doors or 3 doors if you have a bigger stand, but, you don't have the ability to just open both doors and have one big opening. There's a center brace more often than not, and when the tank is full, you may not be willing to try to remove that center brace to get your sump out if the need arises. There's not too many stand manufacturers these days that have the one big opening. I've had to custom make some stuff for clients and actually modify some of the bigger name brand stands. Aqueon makes a pine cabinet that I've had to mess with. Marineland. I think the higher end Marineland stands come with a big double opening, but most of the other brands don't. So that's definitely something you have to consider when taking into account the size of the sump. You have to install it prior to the tank being put on and being filled up. You obviously want as big of a sump as you can fit, and also take into account other things that are going to be stored down in the stand outside of the sump. So if you're going to run reactors, like the BRS 2-stage reactor for GFO and carbon, a lot of times people will hang that inside the stand, and that's something you have to take into consideration for space. Plumbing takes up some space, where your overflows are going, where your return pump is. So you don't want to fill your stand front to back, left to right with sump and then run out of space for everything else. So that's a big thing to consider. Number 3 is the chamber spacing. As you build your list of equipment that you want, must-haves, and even maybe eventually haves down the road, you need to take into account, will that fit into my sump? Will it fit into the chamber that I want it to? So usually, and I'm going to say usually because that's not always the way on the pre-manufactured sumps, you have the first chamber where you have mechanical filtration, typically done in the way of filter socks. Your second chamber is typically the chamber that you would put your protein skimmer in. If it's a refugium sump, sometimes that center chamber is strictly for a refugium. Other times, if the sump is a larger model, you may have a skimmer chamber, then a refugium chamber. Generally, both of those are considered to be the middle of the sump. The last chamber is generally where you would put your return pump and any pumps for any other equipment like reactors if you're running a multiple pump setup. That's typically found in the last chamber. So knowing the sizes of these chambers and knowing the footprint of your equipment that's on your shopping list is critical ahead of time. It's not going to be any fun if you buy a sump that's too small or a skimmer that's too big and then come to find out it doesn't fit in there. And skimmers can be tricky. If it's not a space saver model where the pump literally fits within the footprint of the skimmer and it's next to the skimmer, you have to make sure to find the sizing that takes into account the pump as well. Sometimes they list both. They list the footprint of the skimmer and then the skimmer with pump. So you have to make sure it can fit in addition to everything else you're going to put in there. So that's a big thing that you have to take into account when looking at purchasing a sump, or even if you're building your own, is where to put the chambers. All right, so number 4, bubble control. In some way, shape, or form, you are going to want to have the ability to prevent microbubbles from going back in the tank. That's my personal opinion. I've seen recently, I'm going to say recently because it hasn't come across my radar before now. Maybe I've just been living under a rock, but anyway, a new trend with this whole micro scrubbing bubbles in the tank, and that's a good thing. I'm not sold on the idea, but let's save that for another video. The tried and true ideology with a sump is that you want to prevent microbubbles from going back in your tank. So usually this is done with a set of baffles in between the middle chambers and the last pump chamber. So whether you do it with a set of baffles, or a lot of these pre-manufactured sumps have a foam block that's put into these baffles that is a so-called micro bubble trap and prevents these bubbles from going back into the main display. However it's done, it's something you want to consider. More of a concern if you're building your own. You want to make sure you get the heights correct, the number of baffles. There's plenty of plans online. I'm not going to go into any great detail on the hows of building micro bubble baffles, things of that nature. If you guys have interest, I can make another video on that, but I don't want to get off track on this particular topic. It's something, if you're building your own, you want to look into, and if you're not, odds are the pre-manufactured sump that you're purchasing has something in place already for you. I will note though, if you're using a pre-manufactured sump and you're using the foam block, every time you service the skimmer, service that foam block. Because a lot of times what will happen is that foam block starts to clog and it'll actually raise the water level in your center chamber. And if we don't know already, we should know after this, is that if your water level changes in the skimmer section, if it's a classic internal skimmer, it's going to get messed up. Water level differentiation by as little as an inch, too much, too little, can throw the skimmer off. If the water level gets too high, your skimmer pukes its guts out and you have a wonderfully nasty smelling mess inside your sump. And Murphy's Law is that it always happens when the skimmer cup is full or needs to be cleaned. That seems to be the only time it happens. It never happens with an empty skimmer cup. It's always when it's gone that long and the foam needs to be addressed as well, and it just pukes and you have a crazy mess because all that nasty stuff then gets dumped right back in the tank. And how many ever weeks worth of skimming, or if it's, skimming better, a week's worth of skimmate just dumps right back into the tank. So keep that in mind with the foam piece inside the micro bubble trap there. All right, so last but not least, number 5 is consider maintenance on the sump. Now this may sound a little bit weird. What do I mean by maintenance? I mean that detritus is inevitably going to build up in there. Even if you have mechanical filtration, you're religious about cleaning your filter socks, stuff will make its way past. It's just inevitability. It's always going to happen. So you need to be able to access inside the sump. You need to be able to remove pumps, remove the skimmer potentially, access anything and everything inside the sump. That has to be taken into account when you're placing everything initially, when you're designing the layout of what you're going to fit in there. You need to be able to remove stuff, clean in there, put stuff back in. And you want it to be easy. You don't, that's the thing with this hobby. If any part of the maintenance aspect is a huge chore or a huge undertaking, you're not going to do it. You have to make maintenance easy, or else you're not going to do it. And what happens when you don't maintain? Well, I watched a video today. It was a talk at MACNA. I think it was 3 years ago. I forget the gentleman's name, but he actually did a talk on quote unquote the whole old tank syndrome thing. And he actually, I don't know if he created the acronym or he got it from somewhere else, LARS, Lazy Ass Reefer Syndrome. So when we make maintenance hard, we don't do it. We get lazy about it. And then that starts impacting water quality, impacting our system, and old tank syndrome happens, basically. So make maintenance easy. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this short list on 5 things to consider when buying a sump. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for being a subscriber. If you're not a subscriber already, click the link above here and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys. And a little extra bit at the end here. Usually I don't like to do more than one take, but in this case I'll make an exception. I'd like to thank everybody that's recently become a subscriber since I did my 100 sub giveaway video. I think I had 92 when I did that video just a couple of days ago. We're up to 114 now, and that just blows me away, and I'm really appreciative of all of our new subscribers and our old, those that have already made entry videos and are excited about the giveaway. I really, really appreciate it, and I thank you, and thanks for watching. So we'll see you next time. For real this time.